1980s, dating was a whole different game. From meeting people without apps to planning dates without texting, romance happened completely offline. But in today's tech-dominated world, connecting with a crush looks totally different. Join me as I count down all the way that dating now is nothing like the good old days of big hair, cassette tapes, and landlines back in the rad 1980s. First date attire. Getting all dressed up for a hot date back in the 1980s was no joking. Big, wild hair was definitely in style for the ladies thanks to bands like Bon Jovi and Poison setting the tone. The bigger the bangs and Aquanet hairspray hold, the better. Fashion was all about attention-grabbing neons, spandex, miniskirts, and major shoulder pads. And you couldn't forget the permed bangs clinging to your flashy earrings as you waited for your date to arrive. Guys also took their first date style seriously with some hyper-masculine looks that would seem a little silly today. We're talking tight-ripped jeans, animal print button-downs unbuttoned to show chest hair, blazers with the sleeves pushed up, and of course, gold chains galore. Whether they gelled their short hair into a crazy spike or went with a ponytail, 80s dudes made sure their look said, "I'm like totally rad and boss, dude," before heading out for a night of excellent adventure with their new wave dream girl. How people met for dates. Back in the totally tubular 1980s, meeting someone to go on a date with was really different than it is today. Can you imagine a world without dating apps and social media? Wild, right? With no Tinder, Bumble, or even texting existing yet, people had to meet each other face-to-face to start up a romantic connection. A lot of couples-to-be through school, jobs, or mutual friends. You might meet your future BF or GF in your high school algebra class or while boogieing down together at a totally gnarly disco club by asking around your crew for people to set you up on a blind date with. Or you might even resort to putting a classified ad in the newspaper. Yup, people did that back then. If you think we could be a righteous match, call me on my landline. Could you even imagine posting your number in a newspaper now? Some use the video method where they state the spec they need and include their telephone number and address. It was a seriously wacky world before online dating came around. Traditional gender roles. Now, when it came to following old-school dating rules, the 80s were pretty traditional about how men and women were supposed to act. Guys were typically the ones who had to put themselves out there and ask the ladies out on dates. They were expected to make the first move and convince a bodacious babe to go out with them. And when it came time to pay the bill at the end of the night, it was pretty much undisputed that no matter how much Aquanet and electric blue eyeshadow she used, the dude paid. Going Dutch on a date was seen as pretty unchivalrous. But even as more women entered rad careers like business, law, and medicine in the 80s after the groovy feminist movement in the 1960s and 70s, old traditions died hard. Men still called most of the shots and held doors open for their dynamite dates. But hey, at least the babes didn't have to pay for their popcorn or wine coolers at the movie theater. Communication. Prior to dates, can you even imagine having to use your phone for actually talking to people instead of texting? That was the reality back in the Stone Age of the 1980s. When you met someone tubular at the arcade or through a friend, you had to call them up on the landline phone at home to make a date. And not only that, but you had to actually talk to your potential new bae for a few minutes while hashing out the crush-worthy details. Where should we go dancing Friday night? What time can I pick you up in my bitchin' Camaro? Should I bring you a corsage like they do in the movies? You couldn't hide behind a cute emoji or wait 3 days to return a call to play it cool. Nope. You had to murmur those nerve-wracking first date plans right into the receiver while your parents eavesdropped on the other line. And then hope your triangle-shaped phone headset didn't mess up your freshly permed hair too much. Common first date activities. When it was time for that first radical rendezvous, what did tubular 80s couples like to do for fun? Lots of them followed the classic dinner and a movie formula, chowing down on some tasty tacos or grabbing a slice before catching a bodacious blockbuster at the theater. Other hot date ideas included getting their groove on at Blondie or Madonna concert, cheering on their home teams at football or baseball games, or heading to the local high school gymnasium turned disco club to get their dance on. Whether they wanted to dine, dance, or melt their hearts to killer synth-pop music, 80s couples definitely knew how to have some totally fresh fun with feathered hair and Reeboks. The do's and don'ts of 80s dating. Back in the 1980s, going out with someone new usually meant following some pretty strict rules compared to today's anything-goes attitude. Showing up late for your date, forgetting to open doors, and not calling afterward were major no. And physical stuff? Forget about it. Smooching on a first or second date was still seen as moving way too fast by a lot of peeps' parents. Some girls even set strict 5 or 10 date minimums before any lip-locking was allowed. So in many ways, people were more polite and old-fashioned about courtship in the 80s. The price of admission was hairspray, respect, and keeping those wandering hands in check through at least a few showings of The Breakfast Club. Going steady versus playing the field. In the gnarly 1980s, people had some options when it came to their relationship status. Some chose to go steady with a bodacious BF or GF, making it official with varsity jackets, exchanging class rings, or bestowing other tokens like custom bracelets. This was the more conservative approach, dating exclusively and smoothing your feathers out before getting totally radical. Then there were the dudes who rocked a Rhodes piano key scarf open to the chest and lived up to the media stereotypes of big-haired playboys playing the field all decade long. They donned their Ray-Bans and Corvettes and cruised for chicks without ever settling on just one leading lady. So whether someone was steadfast or a free agent depended a lot on their style. Public displays of affection. Showing affection out in public while dating in the 1980s tended to still be pretty PG compared to today's anything-goes culture. Hand-holding was generally the most socially acceptable sign of togetherness as a couple strolled through the mall. Of course, plenty of radical teens pushed boundaries with making out in high school hallways or at drive-in movies. But heavy kissing, cuddling, or other touchy-feely stuff often raised eyebrows or got you branded as loose or fast by the standards of the day. Lip-locking in public, especially with tongue, was seen as super risky, private behavior by a lot of adults. So, for the most part, 1980s paramours kept their hands where parents and teachers could see them, no matter how bodacious their feelings. Breaking up in the 80s era. When 1980s couples split, it was usually a pretty straightforward face-to-face proposition. Calling your steady guy or girl on the phone and giving them the "it's not you, it's me" talk was seen as pretty cold. Making excuses about being too busy and gradually slowing communication, also known as the slow fade, hadn't really caught on yet. And ghosting someone without explanation definitely wasn't a thing. Breaking hearts in the 80s era tended to be a more formal, polite affair. Both people would sit down in person, have an honest conversation about why they weren't feeling that romance spark anymore, maybe shed some tears or try to stay friends. Getting dumped was never fun, but at least you avoided getting left wondering where your rad rocker chick went. After that totally fresh look back at old-school 1980s dating, it makes you wonder, could millennials handle all those rules and traditions today? With no texting or DM slides to hide behind, having to actually speak to your crush on the phone and make formal plans would freak a lot of modern peeps out. But even with all the wild fashions and old etiquette, hopefully this blast back to the past gives an appreciation for how tubular dating can be, no matter the decade or generation. Our parents and grandparents sure knew how to play the game of love with style back in their day.